I work in mental health, I volunteer in mental health, and I'm trying to develop an online community channel called Mental Olympians to promote recovery. But I wasn't always interested in mental health. I grew up in Montreal in 1962 and studied business before starting a corporate broadcasting career in Toronto in 1987. Things were going pretty well until about 1994, and I was negotiating these contracts for distribution deals for specialty television services. And I was really pushing myself quite hard, and there was quite a bit of stress. And I started going home, and I was going to bed later and later and getting up earlier and earlier. And one morning I woke up about 2 a.m. and I thought, sleep is highly overrated. But it's not highly overrated. I should have realized that that was an early warning sign of problem. Because my grandfather had died in a psychiatric hospital 6 months before I was born. And my father had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder after trying to commit suicide. So I really should have been on top of the things and should have gone to the doctor. But I had never felt so good. And pretty soon I was feeling better and better and better. And then I started experiencing delusions grandeur. And I thought, I'm destined to change the world, which is a pretty seductive thought, I have to tell you. So in that state, I listened to Bob Marley's Get Up, Stand Up, the song, about 30 times one day, over and over and over again. And then the next day I went in and I quit my job to change the world. So I thought, how am I going to change the world? So I thought, well, I might as well change the Canadian broadcasting system first, because that's what I know best, right? So it makes sense. So and my insight and knowledge of the industry did come in handy, because three MPs and I appeared at a Parliament Hill press conference, and we were calling for an investigation into the federal broadcasting regulator for this really weird corporate welfare scheme that I objected to and hadn't been reported. To make a long story short, there were questions the next day in the House of Commons to the Prime Minister, but the issue was dodged. Canadian journalists didn't really want to deal with a Canadian media company scandal. And two of the MPs sort of drifted away, but one stuck with me, and I kept thinking, no, this isn't on. So, it got pretty personal too, because if you ever try to change the system, expect a little bit of resistance along the way. So there was a pretty bad smear campaign that was going on, and it was so bad, in fact, that two journalists felt compelled to actually defend me in the press. And so I was just saying, no, I'm going at this, and I'm putting my life on hold until this is over. And I just went on and on and on. And by May 1996, I'd lost about 20% of my body weight. I was in a severe depression, and I realized that I had bipolar disorder. It's really hard to describe what those feelings are in that state. But I just was. I remember being curled up in a fetal position on the floor, sobbing that I was never going to work again. I was never going to enjoy life again. And it was really, it was just really, obviously it's not true, because I'm working, I'm enjoying life again. But at the time, it was really, really convincing. And it was quite bizarre, because less than a year before that, a journalist had written that he was applauding me for charging headlong into battle with two of the most powerful opponents in the world. And I have to tell you that industry and government, they're not the opponent. Depression, that is a pretty big problem. And during that time, I felt really, really ashamed. Like, I thought, these guys in the industry have been calling me a crank and a fanatic and a fruitcake, and now I have bipolar disorder. I'm stuffed. Well, I wasn't thinking stuffed. I was thinking a different word, but for this audience, I'll say stuffed. So I ended up going to this. I got at my GP. My GP agreed with my diagnosis and said, yes, I think you have bipolar disorder. So he got me to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist said, look. I said, look, how do I get back? I brought in a front page feature story from when journalists had covered the story. I said, how do I get back into this? And he said, look, you have a severe mental illness. You can never be. It's impossible for you to be an activist, because stress is a trigger to relapse, and you have a severe mental illness. And I was just shattered. Like, I was thinking of suicide. I was thinking, it's pretty dark places, but I kept on, and then I saw a sort of a crack in the darkness. And as soon as I saw that crack in the darkness, I was right back into my campaign, and it started to lift my mood, because I was going, I'm going for this. I don't care. I was just sort of, everything else had gone by the wayside. But the problem is, I'd gone back too soon, and I pushed myself far, far too hard. And in short order, I went from that sort of mild psychosis, from delusions grandeur, to acute psychosis. Now, there's a difference between mild psychosis and acute psychosis, and I'll try to explain what that difference is. One morning, I was looking at Zach, my black Labrador retriever, and I realized that dog, spelled backwards, is God, right? So in my psychotic state, like I'm not a religious person normally, but in that state I was thinking, whoa, this is pretty heavy. So I was thinking, whoa. So I went down to the bank. Well, first of all, and I was thinking, poor Zach, like laboratories love food, right? So this guy had eaten glycerin soap, like he loved food. So I took all the food out of the cupboards, out of all the packaging, out of the fridge, put it in a corner because I thought Zach's only had one type of food his whole life. If I was a dog, I want a bit more variety, wouldn't you? Like, of course you would. But Zach knew that normally he'd be diving in there, but actually he could tell that something was wrong, and he didn't touch the food. He just stayed with me, which was pretty insightful. So I went to my bank and I took out money, and I started walking downtown Toronto, handing out money to people begging along the street. Once I ran out of money, I gave one gentleman my coat, and although it was -1 outside, I'm pretty wimpy when it comes to weather and being cold. In psychosis, I couldn't feel the cold. My brain was just on fire and just racing. And at that moment, I thought that I was actually connected to God. I thought that God was willing to eradicate poverty and suffering in the world if I proved that I had faith that all you needed to change the world was the truth, by walking naked for the rest of my life in the world. Now, as a sort of activist kind of guy, that's a pretty good trade-off, isn't it? Nudity and humiliation for world change. So long story short, the police sort of intercepted my walk after about 15 minutes, and I was taken to psychiatric hospital. Problem is, the industry found out about this. My reputation was destroyed. I got out of the hospital after my fashion faux pas about 2 weeks later, but I was a shattered man. I was just lost. I was dumbfounded, thinking, what has happened to my life? And I thought, I just have to vanish. I have to disappear. And so I did. I went to the States, I went to Europe, I went to Africa, and I was just trying to catch my wind and go, what has happened with my life? So I was coming back to Toronto to visit family and friends. I thought, I'll just stop for a little while. And I ran into this Australian woman at a friend's party. And so Australian woman. So I asked her out, and we went out for a date, and we're eating dinner. It's going really well, and there's this chemistry. And I'm thinking, this is really, I'm really enjoying this date. But then I thought, when do you actually tell someone, if you're starting to date someone, your story about these are my circumstances? I was thinking, this is like, I think I'm a pretty good problem solver, but I was kind of stumped, and I was getting a bit nervous, so I thought, I'm just going to tell her. So I told her that same date over dessert, coffee and cake, and this is my story. Whew. Well, as it turned out, her friend had actually been diagnosed with bipolar disorder after experiencing psychosis, and Gail and I have been together ever since. And I'd have to say that her love and support and friendship has changed the course of my life. But at the same time, I still was suffering in Toronto. I still couldn't get together in Toronto. So we came here in 2001 for a fresh start. And at that time, I thought, I don't want anyone to know about this stuff in Canada. I just want to start a new life. No one knows. No one has to know. But all that changed when I used the toilet in the University of Canberra one day, and it's weird, isn't it? And I saw this poster from Mental Illness Education ACT, and it said, it was looking for people with lived experience in mental illness to actually share their stories to reduce stigma to classroom students, and also help them in their help-seeking behavior and get help early type thing. And I thought that really appealed to me. I thought, so my story can actually kind of help someone. I thought, yeah, I'd like that. So I became a volunteer educator in early 2002, and I've just been sort of going and going and going ever since. In 2004, the late Dr. Grace Groom at the Mental Health Council of Australia hired me to 1 day a week at the council. And although 1 day a week doesn't sound a lot to if you're working full time, for me it wasn't just about it wasn't the money. It was about I started building up my sense of identity with MEAC as a mental health advocate. I started feeling like I can never work again, but maybe I can work again. Then I was working again. So I ended up going to study social work at ACU in 2005, and I graduated in 2007. And it's just. I just wish that if someone goes through a severe depression like that, they could just realize that although it seems really convincing, it's not the way it's going to be. And in early 2008, 2 months after I did a presentation on my recovery at the World Psychiatric International Congress, I made a quick trip to Canada, and I appeared at a public hearing by the Canadian Broadcasting Authority, and I was granted 15 minutes to make a presentation, and I only needed 3 minutes to say what I wanted to say on the public record. And it resulted in questions the next day in the House of Commons. And once again, the journalist dropped the ball. But as opposed to putting my life on hold and seeing what catastrophe happened last time, not only to myself, but to all the people around me who love me, I jumped back on the plane and came back to my home in Canberra, and I started my professional social work career with Community Youth Justice as a case manager. And then I changed jobs in 2009 to Woden Community Service, where I am right now in the Personal Helpers and Mentors program, and we have a black dog named Sheba, a black Labrador Retriever, and that's my story. Thank you.